This video is going to show how to repair and restore a Hammond Oakwood mantle clock. I received this in non-working condition and don't know if it's because there's no plug on the end of the power cord or if the rotor is frozen on the inside. So we'll have to troubleshoot both to figure that out. I have restored several Hammond clocks in the past, but never saw one like this. What was interesting was on the back of it, I saw a sticker which reads Hydroelectric Power Commission of Ontario, September 8th, approved electric clock, and the number 119. In looking this up, I discovered that the Hammond Clock Company had a factory in Toronto, and it was from 1931 to 36, which makes this clock anywhere between 85 to 90 years old. When I researched it further, I saw a picture of this clock on the information page, and that's how I know that it's a Oakwood mantle. The names of the models are not put on the back of Hammond clocks because they tended to be available through the catalogs and advertising that they published back in the day. Before opening up the clock, I want to try to confirm that it is in fact restorable. And the first thing I want to check on is that the wiring in the coil is intact. And to do that, I use an ohm meter. And I just have to touch the leads of it to the ends of the wire. And you can see by the numbers flashing that the wiring is intact. We have current going through it. The next thing I want to do is attach a power cord to the ends here, plug it in, and see if it's going to run. Okay, I've attached a power cord to the line, put on a couple of wire nuts just to keep it safe. And now we have to give the start knob a spin, see if it gets going. And as you can see, it is not running. So that tells me that the rotor is likely frozen. We'll have to take it apart to clean and lubricate it. To start repairing this clock, I have to open up the back of it. There are 3 screws here. But what I've also noticed is that what is missing is what's known as the data plate. Would sit over here. It gives the instructions on how to start the clock. I also noticed that the set knob, which is usually a round knob and kind of comfortable to turn, has been replaced with a hex nut. And this is a very tight one to set the time on, very uncomfortable. Hopefully I can find a round knob to replace this with. So the first step again is going to be to undo these 3 screws here. Before I remove the 3 screws though, I have to take off the start knob. And to do that, you have to grasp the stem with a vice grip. And then rotate off the nut. And now the screws. And here we go. So the next step is going to be figuring out how to get this out of the back. It looks like there are 2 screws here and here, as well as these 2, which holds this plate. I imagine once that's removed, this whole clock face is going to come right out. One thing of note that I saw is that I don't know if the factories in Canada were different than those in the United States, but in removing the set knob, I had to turn it to the left to take it off. Every clock I've restored that has been made in the United States, it's the opposite. Instead of righty-tighty, lefty-loosen, you would actually have to rotate the knob to the right to remove it. Another thing I realize now in looking is that I only should have to take off these 2 screws to get the clock face out. These 2 is what holds the rotor into the mechanism. So we'll take these screws out next. And there you go. Not so hard. Let's get the piece of glass out of here. We'll put this aside, clean it up later. And put the case aside as well. The next step is going to be to remove the hands and the face. The second hand is held on with friction grip. It can be a very tight fit, very hard to remove. So what I like to do first is take some WD-40 and spray it into a little cap that I have, and then with a paintbrush, just dab it around the hand. And then give that 5 or 10 minutes to penetrate before trying to remove it. Okay, the WD-40 has been soaking now for about 10-15 minutes. And what you need to do is, with a couple of screwdrivers, just try to get underneath the edge of the second hand and gently pry up. A little on each side. This is a real tight one. It's coming. Got it. Very good. Next, we have to take off the hour and the minute hand. Those are held on with a nut, but I'm going to apply the WD-40 here as well, and then we'll give that 10 or 15 minutes. The WD-40 has been soaking for a while, and now I'll try to loosen the nut. Okay. And then the hour hand. Good. The next step will be removing the face. There's a couple of tabs in the back that are have to be bent to remove it. Let's see if you can see this here. There's one over here and one here. They have to be bent open very carefully, because if you bend them too fast or too hard, you can break them. So I'm going to do that to take my time, and then I'll come back and show you how it looks. The best way to do this, I find, is to bend one of the tabs away from the edge here, which lets the face come away on the top, and then you can just slide it off from the bottom, so you won't have to bend both tabs. Next, I'm going to remove the rotor. I have to undo these two nuts here. And one thing I always recommend, if you're taking apart a clock for the first time, take photos of every step of the way so you know what it looks like when you're reassembling it. You won't run into any uncertainties. Okay, this is the rotor. It's not frozen, it's spinning a little bit, but we still need to open this up, clean out the old oil, and put fresh oil in there. The other thing is that this power cord is not original. It was replaced at some point. So I'm going to remove this just to make it easier to handle the clock. I've removed the power cord, and what I've noticed is that we have these little black sleeves which cover the wire. On original wiring, you'll see this covering where the original power cord connects to the wires that come out of the coil. The problem I see with this one when I slid this little sleeve down is, and these are the old cloth covered wires, it's almost broken here. It almost looks like it was soldered by someone, but it's almost as if one strand of wire is connecting this, and this one's almost as poor. So I really don't trust these to hold up. I'm going to have to cut it off here, strip some of the insulation here, and end up attaching the new power cord this close to the coil, which shouldn't really be a problem. It should still work out. In dealing with the rotor, there are two things that happen. One is that the oil inside tends to dry out over the years, making it hard and sometimes impossible to spin this output gear. And the other is that the oil will leak from here and get into the mechanism where the gears are, and it gets those gears gunked up, so those have to be cleaned as well. I deal with the rotor first. It has a solder covered plug here, which has to be removed, and all of the oil in here ends up being loosened up and removed using a penetrating oil. Once it's filled with that, this has to sit for 24 hours and to soak in. During that time is when I can focus on getting the gears out of here. So the first step is going to be, as I say, opening up the rotor. A couple of things to know when you're trying to get the plug out of these rotors. One is you need to clamp it in something so that as you're heating up the solder, you're not going to burn yourself. I like to use a little C-clamp like this. Just fasten it in here. And then the other thing is, once that plug is exposed, you need a very fine tipped screwdriver, I find works best to sort of pry the thing out. I'm going to clean up all of this stuff, and I'll show you how I start doing the solder removal. I'm going to show how I start removing the solder, and then I'll show you how it looks once it's all removed and the plug is exposed. You just start heating it up and kind of let it run down. And I'll finish it up and then let you see how it looks. I have the plug exposed. I'll show you how that looks. That little round is the plug. And then what I'll do with the small screwdriver, I have to kind of score around the edge of it just to make a little seam, a little edge opening, and then I'm able to pry that out. And that also will take a few minutes. So I'll work on that, and once it's popped out, I'll show you. The plug is removed. You can see the hole where it came from. And the plug itself looks like this. And once the rotor has been cleaned and re-lubricated, I place the plug back in and close it up with some new solder. Next, I have to dissolve and remove the old oil that's in the rotor. To do that, I'm going to fill this up with liquid wrench. It's a good penetrating oil. I have these small bottles that are very handy for this purpose. What you want to do fill it up about halfway. Give it a bit of a shake. And then fill it up the rest of the way. And once it's full, I'm going to set it up, and it's going to sit like this for about 24 hours. And while that's dissolves, I'll get to work on taking apart the clock mechanism. The rotor has been soaking now for about, I'd say 10 hours. The old oil is starting to leak out of it. You can see it has a bit of a greenish color to it. And we'll give it another 8 or 10 hours In the meantime, I'll start taking this apart, and I'm going to remove these 4 nuts first to get this plate off, which will remove all the gears from this front plate. Again, this is a good time to take some pictures so you know exactly how this looks when you're trying to put it back together. So I'll loosen up these 4 nuts and then we'll see how it looks. I'll try to show this to you. I have the 4 nuts removed here. And first I'll remove this little bar, and then have to try to gently lift this plate up without disturbing the gears that are lying underneath it. Here we see 2 gears on the plate, and this is the formation on the side. I'll stop here and take a picture of this, because all of these are going to come off to be cleaned, and I want to make sure I get them back in the same position. One thing I want to show before I remove all the gears, on the start nub, there's a small little spring here, and you want to remove that and put it aside so that doesn't get lost. To clean all the gears, I like to use some Dawn dish detergent in some warm water and take a toothbrush and just brush really well around all the teeth in the gears. Sometimes you'll have some gunked up oil stuck in them, and a toothpick comes in handy to sort of pick out all the leftover oil that you may have. Another part of this plate is a sort of a spring clip. That can be removed also, and when you're reassembling the gears, this will go on last, because when you put the plates together, you can visually look in there to make sure that the gears are lining up in the little holes, the openings in the front and the back plate. The gears have been cleaned, and what I'm going to do next is lubricate them using a synthetic clock oil. You can get that on Amazon. You need very little of it, just a few drops around the teeth of each gear, also around the edge, just a very, very little. And once everything is lubricated, I'm going to reassemble it into the plate, put everything back together, and pretty much placing the gears in reverse order that I removed them. And once it's all together, I'll show you how that looks. Everything is reassembled. The gears are in proper position. When I turn the start knob, I see the gears spinning on the inside, and the set knob as well. I don't know if you can see them turning in there, but they are. And the last thing to put on is that spring clip. One end goes here, flicks around, and there you go. Okay, what we'll do next is get back to working on the rotor, draining the old oil, and then cleaning it out with the 3-in-1 oil will be next. To do that, I first have to drain the liquid wrench from the rotor. Pretty much just shake it out, and you'll notice it comes out green. That's the old oil that's in here. It takes several minutes to shake all of this out, so I'm going to go ahead and do that, and then I'll be filling it up again, this time with the 3-in-1 oil, and then we're going to let that sit for 24 hours. You can see how much of that old green oil has drained out of the rotor. Now I get to fill it up, this time with the 3-in-1 oil. Again, fill it about halfway. Check around. Fill it the rest of the way. And we'll let this sit for 24 hours. While that is sitting, I'll go to work on cleaning up the dial and the hands. The hands can be cleaned with some alcohol. It brings the shine back up on the second hand. But you need to be careful, nothing too abrasive. I like to use a little bit of Dawn dish detergent with a Q-tip dipped in water. Anything stronger, either alcohol or something like Fantastic, you run the risk of removing the paint on the numbers here. So you need to do that carefully, but I'll do that and we'll come back. I've cleaned the clock face along with the hands. One thing I forgot to mention earlier is when I was putting the gears back together, I cut off those floppy ends of the wires here because they were just getting in the way. So next I'm going to strip off the insulation here, and by that time I should be able to drain the 3-in-1 oil out of the rotor and get back to work on that. I've stripped the insulation from the wires. You have to be very careful when dealing with these cloth covered wires. Everything is very brittle and it's easy to break it off the ends. You also have to be careful not to break the wiring off from the coil. If that happens, then you have to find yourself a new coil. And the next I'm going to drain the 3-in-1 oil from the rotor, same way we did the liquid wrench. You just start shaking it out. It still comes out pretty green. And again, this will take several minutes to do that. I'll finish draining it and then we'll come back. The rotor has been draining for 24 hours and you can see how much oil has come out of it again. What I do now is replace the paper towel with a clean one. And I will let this sit for another 24 hours to fully drain. I'm going to reattach the dial to the front plate. If you recall, there were 2 tabs of which I bent one of them, so I can engage the one that I didn't bend. And then just bend back the top one. And now we can put the hands on. Start with the hour hand. The minute hand goes on with a retaining nut that can take a little bit of time to fit it properly over the threads. So I'll do that and then we'll come back. Just to clarify the right order to put the hands on, you actually have to put the minute hand on first in order to synchronize the hands correctly. Then rotate this set knob until it's on the 12, and because this knob is, there we go. Then you can remove the minute hand, and now you put the hour hand on the 12. Now I can put the minute hand on and get the nut on the threads correctly. I've got the minute hand on. You'll be surprised how difficult it can be to engage the threads with this nut. It's not a circular thread and it can be a challenge. Next, we'll put on the second hand. And that's pretty much all I can do now until the rotor is cleaned out and relubricated and sealed. The rotor has been draining for another 24 hours. It's about as empty as I'm going to get it. You can see even more has come out. And next I'm going to clean off any residual oil on here with a bit of alcohol. And then replace the plug. And now I'll be positioning this back in a clamp so I can resolder the connection here, sealing it up. It's in the clamp. Now for the solder. that looks pretty good. Now I get to put the rotor back into the clock assembly, hook up the wire, and see if everything works. Okay, the rotor goes here. Okay, next I'm going to hook up a power cord here and we'll plug it in and see if it's working. I've hooked up the power cord and plugged it in. We'll give this start knob a spin and see if it's working. And we're good. The next step is going to be inserting the clock back into the case. Okay, we have the clock case. I've cleaned it up as best I could, along with the glass. First, we'll place the glass in. Then the clock. Okay. The next step, 5 screws I have to put in, 2 here first, then the back for the other 3. So I'll go ahead and do that and then we'll come back. I put in the 2 screws to hold the clock into the case. The next step is going to be to place the back on, but if you recall, I put the start knob on the stem in order to set the time. That has to come off in order to get the back on, and that's on real tight, so we have to grab it and just loosen it up a little bit. Okay, and also I placed a nut in the wire here so that once it's in the unit, if anyone pulls on the cord, it's not going to separate the connections here. So just tuck these in a little bit. And we place the back on. Okay, I just have to do these 3 screws and then we're finished. I'll come back after they're in. Okay, I've put the screws back in. I also put the nut back on for the start knob, and if you recall, this nut is a replacement. It's very difficult to turn. I haven't found a proper size one to fit that stem. This is what they look like from a different clock. They're round, which makes it easy to turn. This just doesn't have the right thread size. Let's turn it around, give it another spin to get it going. And that completes it. The Hammond Oakwood, and this clock was made in Canada. If you enjoyed the video, I have some others on YouTube, similar restorations of different clocks. And I just want to leave you with one last thing. You can hear the motor noise when the clock is tilted like this. And a lot of clocks do that, but when you turn them straight in the proper position, they run quiet. So that's really not a concern. Anyway, hope you enjoyed.